Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. So let me preface what I'm about to say by saying I absolutely have the highest amount of respect possible for Chris Rufo. I love the guy. He's great online. He's great in his activism. He's great in person. He's down to earth. He's very smart. He tweeted a tweet thread this week that I strongly disagree with, and I want to talk about that today. So if you haven't subscribed to the show already, pick up your smartphone, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, hit subscribe on Rumble, hit subscribe, and on YouTube, hit that bell so I can notify you every time we have a new episode, a new interview, or a new video, because we have tons of new content all the time. So I think that Chris Rufo's tweet, he tweeted about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and cautioned conservatives not to become obsessed with the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. He said that Klaus Schwab was not an influential individual, and I strongly disagree. But to understand why, I want to share with you my thought process here, because you have to look to the ideology that's being exported by those who attend the World Economic Forum. Not just Klaus Schwab himself. He's the one who conceived the World Economic Forum. He's still the brains behind it. But those who attend his conference that's happening right now in Davos, what are they taking away from this? What are they taking back to their countries and their businesses? There are some videos from this week in Davos that show this better than my words can explain it. So we're going to take a look at those together. There's a very important tie-in between Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum agenda, his ideology, and what the Biden administration, one of their most pivotal pieces of not just legislation, but one of their pivotal initiatives. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And I want to talk about the green agenda, because the green agenda is what's largely exported from the World Economic Forum. It's at least one branch of what's exported from the World Economic Forum. And I want to talk about the reality of just a part of this green energy agenda, the electric car agenda on the planet, and look at the facts here. Bring in a so-called expert. I almost hate myself these days when I say that someone's an expert, because technocracy has ruined that for me. But in this case, someone with experience in this exact area. I want to read to you a little bit of his experience, because it's pretty interesting. And then I want to talk about this new U.S. government proposition to make our nation a nation with few to no individually owned cars. This is Joe Biden and his administration's secret plan to destroy your neighborhood, to destroy your town, to destroy your city, to destroy your suburbs. So let's get to it. Okay, guys, I love For Patriots, and I think you will too, because a food shortage could be coming, even in the United States. This is what experts were writing as recently as July. Drought, inflation, and even new political policies are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. All you have to do is go into a grocery store to see the reality of this. Look at the price of eggs recently, or the price of milk. That's why survival food is more important than ever. I invite you and encourage you to create your own stockpile of the best-selling For Patriots survival food kits. This is not ordinary food I'm talking about. We're talking about good for 25 years in case of an emergency, super survival food. This food is hand-packed right in the U.S. in a family-owned facility employing 200 Americans. And these kits, let me tell you about the kits themselves. They're compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, they stack easily. They're very easy to store in your house. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. You just add boiling water, you simmer, and you serve. And if you go to forpatriots.com right now and use my code, Liz, you will get 10% off your first purchase on everything. Just go to forpatriots.com, use promo code Liz to get 10% off. That's forpatriots.com, code Liz, to start building your own stockpile today. Okay, so Christopher Russo, bless his heart, I think that he has done phenomenal work in our nation, truly. And anybody who knows me knows that while I appreciate other people in our movement who are doing good, politicians and activists and commentators, media heads, researchers, I never put anybody on a platform. So when I say that I have high respect for Chris Rufo's work, I really mean that. I truly mean that. I think he's done some absolutely incredible work. He's really behind the reality that we have successfully taken down critical race theory in boardrooms, in corporations, in our school systems, at universities. He's done really good work. I don't have to give you his resume. You're, I'm sure, familiar with him. He did a series of tweets this week about the World Economic Forum annual meeting that's happening in Davos right now. This is Klaus Schwab's annual meeting. And I want to read you what Chris Rufo tweeted. He said, unpopular opinion, the obsession with Klaus Schwab, Davos, and the World Economic Forum is misguided as they have little real power over life in America. It's also enervating as it shifts the locus of control to faraway figures, while constructive action can be taken at home. Stay focused, he said. He says, I want the political right to be effective, and the focus on the World Economic Forum is a distraction and an inferiority complex. If instead of the World Economic Forum, we focused on civil service reform, institutional governance, anti-ESG legislation, and higher education reform, we'd be much better off. The big problems in the US, declining labor force participation, family breakdown, social autonomization, drug overdoses, institutional capture, racialist and gender ideologies, collapse of social trust, are not because of Klaus Schwab. There are problems and need our solutions. So I almost could not disagree more with this. Again, it's a respectful disagreement. This is what we do in the conservative movement. We actually bring our ideas to the public forum and debate them publicly because we are not we're not scaredy cats like the left to actually have a debate here. So this is what I'll say. Some of the things that Chris Rufo mentioned are a result of the ideology that Klaus Schwab is indoctrinating the attendees at his conference with, and then deputizing them to disseminate all around the world into some of these very institutions that Chris talks about here. Now, I do agree with Chris that a lot of the action that we need to take here is not trying to ban Klaus Schwab. The action that we need to take is shoring up our institutions so that Klaus Schwab's ideology cannot be infiltrated into them, cannot be embedded into them. But the two things are intricately related. And I want to walk you through my thought process on exactly how I came to this conclusion so that you understand that I'm not just being a contrarian here, that this is a very important part of, what do I always say? If we don't properly acknowledge the reality of the political enemy that we face, then we won't fight well against it. If we don't fight well against it, we won't win, and I want to win. So we have to properly understand what we're facing here. And it's not just that each of these institutions in our nation that Chris Rufo mentions independently corrupted. They were infiltrated with something by an ideology, a shared ideology that was pushed upon them by, yes, higher forces. I know some people say, oh, that sounds really conspiracy if you act like, there's globalists who are trying to control every country, even countries that aren't their own country, but you don't have to look too far to see concrete examples of this that aren't conspiracy theories. I mean, the UN, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, of course, is also an example of this. But let me back up just for a second and walk you through one of my thought processes. So at the very beginning of COVID in early 2020, when we first heard about this, I was living in California at the time. I was living in San Diego with my husband, and California was the first state under Governor Gavin Newsom to lock down. I remember getting the text message in the evening that there was going to be a mandatory shelter-in-place order for the next 2 weeks in California. And I was surprised. I was shocked, actually. I remember just sitting there, turning my phone towards my husband and saying, this is unreal. This is actually unbelievable. I knew that the left was trying to exploit COVID from the very beginning. I knew they weren't interested. They had no journalistic curiosity at the very beginning about what COVID was. Was it deadly to every person? Who was vulnerable? Do we have anything at our disposal already that could have been used as an intervention against it? They weren't interested in any of those and any of those facts. It was obvious they were going to politicize it. But for Gavin Newsom to actually issue this shelter-in-place order, this lockdown order, I was shocked. And my expectation, I remember specifically saying to my husband, people are going to freak out. People are going to hate this. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, people are going to say, I don't think so. You can play politics as long as it doesn't touch my life, but you're not going to tell me that I can't work, that I can't go to church, people weren't even sure in California if they could drive their cars except to the grocery store maybe under penalty of getting pulled over. I remember I had to take my press badge with me in the car because I was worried if I pulled over when I wasn't going to a quote unquote essential function like work or the grocery store. Those were pretty much the two only things that were defined as essential. And my work was only defined as essential because I was in the media. I was worried that if I didn't have my press badge with me, then I would be questioned by police. That's the state. And I was not the only one that felt this way. That was the state of things in California. And I expected people to push back on this. And they didn't. There was a small minority of us who did. But a lot of people, even on our own side, were like, well, it's 2 weeks, right? If we can slow the spread, if we can stop this thing, we can make that sacrifice. Other generations have sacrificed things, right? What makes us special? What makes us different? Why can't we? And I was surprised by this. And I was surprised subsequently at every turn, went from lockdowns, the original lockdown, to the lockdowns that spread all across the country, to the extension of these lockdowns based on no information, to restaurants being closed down, to workers being defined as essential or non-essential, the government telling them that they were non-essential, to social distancing regulations, you weren't allowed to get within 6 feet of another person, to parks being closed down, churches being shuttered, you weren't allowed to practice your religion, you weren't allowed to worship your God. I wasn't allowed to go to church, to masks being forced on people, to schools being shut down. Then we had the vaccines and the mandates, and every single thing that happened that was an outright obvious violation of our liberty. I thought, okay, well, this is going to be it. Maybe people were in so much fear they didn't know the facts when the lockdowns happened, or when they were extended, or when restaurants were shut down, or when people were defined as non-essential workers, or when we were forced to social distance and our parks were closed. And at every step, I thought, this is surely a step too far. This is surely the thing that will cause people to be like, enough. And again, it wasn't. And I remember weeks after the original lockdown saying to my husband, something has shifted inside of me. I think I've actually lost faith in the American people because they've allowed themselves to fall under the thumb of tyranny. And I didn't think that we as a people would do that. And so it's a cynical thing to say, and it's a sad thing to say, right? And I thought, I spent a long time, months and months, thinking about the question, well, why? Why is a nation that's supposed to embody this American spirit, this spirit of liberty and independence and freedom and, get off my lawn, limited government. Why are people on both sides of the aisle so conditioned to accept tyranny in the name of technocracy, in the name of the experts are telling us this is what we must do? And the answer to that is that the left ran their tanks over our institutions. Not in the course of 1 year, not in the course of 2 years, not in the course of 10 years. For decades, the left has run their tanks over our institutions until they achieved institutional capture. Almost any institution in our country, whether it's a governmental institution, whether it's a civil institution, whether it's a cultural institution, the left rules it. Not just in the sense that leftists are at the helm of these institutions, but leftist ideology is so deeply embedded into the core of these institutions that it is successfully indoctrinating generations of Americans to be conditioned to accept tyranny just such as what we saw during COVID. It's a slow process. Slow, like the frog in the boiling pot, right? You drop the frog in the tepid water and the frog doesn't move, and you slowly turn up the heat, the frog doesn't notice until it's too late. Whereas if you dropped the frog in a pot of boiling water, it would jump right out. But no, the left slowly and thoroughly turned up the heat, indoctrinating people, schools, with revisionist history and critical race theory and queer theory, with technocracy itself, this rule by the experts, in our public health institutions and in our medical industry, whether it's pediatricians and the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association, whether it's in medical schools, this idea that nutrition is useless and that alternative medicine is a hoax. Our institutions have been captured at every turn. People have been conditioned to obey those at the head of the institutions because we've been conditioned to live in a technocracy. This has been a long game. That was the result, though, that the American people were conditioned to accept the tyranny of COVID. Okay, so all that being said, fast forward from this happened obviously the beginning of 2020, this thought process of mine, how did this happen? How are the American people allowing this to happen? Through that happened throughout the course of 2020. 2 years later, we get to the midterm elections in 2022. The midterm elections in 2022. The situation that we have, the country's not doing well. We're facing inflation so high, in fact, that this is the highest inflation that we've seen in my lifetime. Wages, even though they're increasing technically, it feels like our paychecks are shrinking because inflation is outpacing wage growth. We have gas prices that are absolutely exorbitant, like California-style gas prices all over the country. Food prices that are so ridiculous. We have, and this is all, by the way, it's not a coincidence. It's not just an economic downturn. It's because of Biden's spending. Biden's spending devalues the dollar, which causes inflation, which has caused these high prices that we are the ones suffering from. We have Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan that was botched, that across the aisle people thought was horrendous. Biden left Afghanistan, surrendered it to the Taliban, and in the process, a dozen U.S. military service members were killed. We have Biden's border crisis. We have the crime in cities across the country, which is also Biden's fault and the left's fault. We had people after the midterm elections at the voting booth who just expressed dissatisfaction. They didn't like what Biden was doing. They were unhappy with the state of things in our country, but it didn't translate. We didn't see this red wave. We didn't see this tsunami that a lot of people actually predicted. And again, the question was why? Why? Why did that not translate? If people are dissatisfied, why didn't it? And they say this after they cast their ballot. Why didn't this translate? Here's where we're gonna have to just censor for YouTube for just a second. You can stick with us because we'll be right back. The uncensored version is gonna be on Rumble, but YouTube won't let me say this. Hey guys, I regret to inform you that this section is censored thanks to the YouTube overlords and our effort not to get permanently booted from YouTube after getting a strike and getting demonetized. You can head over to Rumble or Locals though. This content is available for free on both Rumble and Locals. You can catch the full uncensored episode there. I'll see you over there. So here's where we get back to Chris Rufo's tweet in just a second. First, I want to talk to you about American Hartford Gold. Is it only me, or does the future feel more insecure and uncertain? At every turn, we're getting less for more, while record high inflation, soaring interest rates, and the looming recession are threatening businesses, jobs, and retirement funds. Even Fed Chair Powell wants us to brace for more pain. What is that even supposed to mean? Fortunately, there's a way to secure your hard-earned nest egg so you never have to find out what he meant. You can do what I did. You can call the only precious metals dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They make it simple and easy to protect your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or inside your IRA or 401k. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $1,500 of free silver on your first order. Don't wait. Call them now. Call 866-781-7499. That's 866-781-7499. Or text Liz to 65532. Again, that's 866-781-7499. Or text Liz to 65532. Okay, so the left, with their long march through our institutions, captured our institutions, and indoctrinated generations of Americans to be conditioned to obey technocracy. When the experts speak, you obey. You don't question, you don't think independently, you defer to those who are supposed to know more than you. This is what the left has conditioned us. In order to reverse this is not going to be an overnight reversal. We're going to have to deprogram these institutions, to recapture these institutions. To reverse this, it could take a long time. It's going to take a long time. This is where we get back to the Chris Rufo tweet. Chris Rufo gets all of this. Everything that I just said, Chris Rufo understands this. You can read one article that he's written, watch his Twitter account for 5 minutes. He fully understands this. He's doing the work. Everything that I just said, he is actively doing. He is not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk. He is retaking schools from critical race theory and from queer theory. He's retaking corporations from critical race theory and queer theory, which are the prominent neo-Marxist, what I call 1-2 punch that's getting people. He is doing the work. He's not only reporting on this and exposing it, he's providing legislative solutions to eradicate these poisonous ideologies from these systems and to take back these institutions. And now he's going to do this at the university level. He's going to raise the neo-Marxist administration at the University of Florida and remake the university. He's going to eradicate DEI specifically. That's what I mean by the administration. He's going to eradicate diversity, equity, and inclusion from the University of Florida and remake the university into an actual university. This guy is I don't know how else to phrase it by saying that he is walking the walk. So if he understands all this, then where did he go so wrong on the Klaus Schwab tweet? For this, we have to pivot to Davos and to Klaus Schwab himself. Klaus Schwab's ideology is very evident if you look at any video clips, if you tune into the podcast for 5 minutes at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, which is happening this week in Davos, Switzerland. Evidence, by the way, before we even get to some of those videos, evidence of Klaus Schwab's ideology is also right here in the United States. And I'm not talking about just a little blip here, a little clip here. I'm talking about the highest level of the federal government, the landmark agenda of the Biden administration, Build Back Better. Build Back Better is a World Economic Forum Klaus Schwab agenda item. They're the ones who coined Build Back Better. They're the ones who planned out what's in Build Back Better. This is nasty, nasty stuff. The American government, the Biden administration, is directly influenced by the World Economic Forum. So it's hard to divorce those two things. It's hard to make the claim that Klaus Schwab is not influential when Klaus Schwabian ideology is what was supposed to be the pivotal achievement of the Biden administration. That's the first thing. The second thing is ESG, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But I want to play just a couple clips of what they're saying at Davos right now as we speak. What their plan is, what their ideology is, so that you can hear this for yourself. This is Klaus Schwab opening the annual meeting, and this is what he says his agenda is.
Good evening, and a very cordial welcome to the annual meeting 2023. I express this cordial welcome on behalf of the Board of Trustees, and my colleague, Borge Brend, is the President, and all the members of the Management Board, as well as all the people who are here to make your stay here enjoyable and productive. We couldn't meet at a more challenging time. We are confronted with so many crises simultaneously. What does it need to master the future? I think to have a platform where all stakeholders of global society are engaged. Governments, business, civil society, the young generation, and I could go on, I think is a first step to meet all the challenges.
Well, he's never not going to sound like a villain, regardless of whether it's a video from this year or last year. The guy is a supervillain. I mean, he's talking about mastering the future. What does that mean? What does that mean, Klaus Schwab, to master the future? Does that mean that you want to rule society and rule the world? It does, because this certain phrase that he used in this 1 minute clip, this welcoming speech that he gave, he said, a platform for all of the stakeholders of global society. The stakeholders of global society. We're going to put a pin on that phrase because we're going to come back to it in just a second. But we also had the European Commission Vice President talking about a policy that's endorsed, clearly embraced by the attendees and on stage here, at the World Economic Forum, meaning Klaus Schwab deliberately gave platform to this idea, to this policy, political policy, which is an implicit endorsement of it. And I'll let you hear exactly what that policy is for yourself.
Well, we need the people who understand the language and the case law in the country. Because what qualifies as hate speech, as illegal hate speech, which you will have soon also in the US. I think that we have a strong reason why we have this in the criminal law. We need the platforms to simply work with the language and to identify such cases. The AI would be too dangerous.
Okay, so that's a panel called The Clear and Present Danger of Misinformation. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed who was sitting next to this vice president of the European Commission, it was her right, but it'd be, if you're looking at the video, it's off to the left. Brian Stelter, formerly of CNN, was on this panel, The Clear and Present Danger of Misinformation. You'd think maybe that he was the example of the clear and present danger of misinformation, but no. The European Commission vice president says that the illegal hate speech, which you will soon have in the US, this censorship is really just criticism of dissent. We know exactly what hate speech is, or what the left redefines hate speech to be in the United States, and that's anything that is contradictory to their ideology, anything that you and I say, anything that's said by a conservative, anything that's said by a Trump supporter, anything that's said critically of the radical left. So this is all from the first day or two of the conference. And then we have a member of parliament from a Swiss member of parliament who talks about this larger goal. What is the goal of all of this reorganization of society? And I'll let you hear this for yourself. Take a listen.
Important for policy is really to change the rules of the game, no? So that sustainability becomes the easier choice, not just for the people, but also for the companies, no? So also then changing the way districts work. For instance, in Zurich, we have a lot of districts where you actually don't need a car, because all the activities, school, buying something, everything you can do in walking distance, And by doing that, people don't buy a car, and it's not felt like actually they would like to have a car and they are not allowed to have it, but they simply don't need it because the environment was built in a way that they don't need it. And I think this is what policy needs to do. They have to change the environment. So a sustainable lifestyle, a lifestyle in harmony with nature is the easiest way to go. And also for the companies. And here perhaps a last point. I really like what you said on following through. We had all these nice commitments. We had the Paris Agreement. We also here at World Economic Forum have every year very nice commitments. What's important is really to follow through and also to shed the light. Sometimes you're very critical with those who are acting, and we need to be critical, and see that there's no greenwashing, but we should also put the light on those who are not acting. And I think policy needs to try, and I think, for instance, Biden's suggestion that the government only buys with companies who commit to Paris, who commit to science-based targets. I think that's a smart policy. So that policy tries to leverage also the action from companies and somehow gets all companies to act. I think this is a smart way to do politics.
So essentially he's saying that under his vision for society, there would be no need for individuals to own cars because of social engineering that would change cities into this really dense, compact area, urban center, and there'd be punishment for companies that also don't adhere to this. So the reason that I picked these three videos in this succession is because this perfectly exemplifies the tactical ideology of Klaus Schwab's ideology. And what I mean by that is the tactical ideology is exactly how they're going to make the underlying ideology become reality. So Klaus Schwab first told us that his underlying goal or his agenda is control, to master the future, to be in charge of the future. He wants control. How are they going to exact control over people? Well, they can't just steal it. That people usually rebel when something's just snatched away from them. Well, they're going to do this through censorship. You can't criticize those in power. You can't dissent because you will be censored, you will be stifled, you will be silenced, you will be canceled. And because of that, those in power will have no mechanism of accountability, or the people, I should say, will have no mechanism of accountability to hold their elected officials or people who are unelected officials, bureaucrats, to any sort of standard of behavior. After the censorship, then there will be the imposition of social engineering to beget exactly what this Swiss MP described. And all of this reorganization of society is all in the name of these so-called higher morals. The problem is these morals are defined by just radical leftist ideology, this climate change alarmism, this radical environmentalism. It's closer to paganism than it is to any real morals. But these people don't even believe in it themselves. They fly into Davos on their private jets. They have enormous carbon footprints and huge amounts of carbon emissions because they don't believe what they're saying about their climate change alarmism, their carbon footprints, their greenhouse gas emissions. They're just using that to set their own arbitrary sense of quote unquote morality. So all of this being established, we go back then to Klaus Schwab. He wants control, but how exactly is he going to control society? What does that mean to master the future? He's told us both in that speech when he used that phrase, stakeholders of global society. This phrase stakeholder is from his books. He's written multiple books about this, and it's about stakeholder capitalism. Now, we're going to contrast stakeholder capitalism with what we have right now. What we have right now is called shareholder capitalism, for better or for worse. Shareholder capitalism is exactly what it sounds. It's where a private business owned by a private individual makes decisions about their business based on the ability to profit. They make business decisions based on what will be best for their bottom line. Now, in doing so, in a free market society, this doesn't mean screwing people over. This means that they will be offering goods and services to the marketplace that will be mutually beneficial to somebody else, meaning somebody else will say, hey, I want your product, I want your service, I'll pay you. Great, we both benefit. Therefore, the company profits, and the shareholders of that company also are satisfied. That's why it's called shareholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is much, much different. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you why I like cozy earth bedding. I'm trying to start out the new year right with getting good sleep night in and night out, and it's made possible thanks to my cozy earth bedding. It's no wonder that over 5,000 customers, just like me, have left 5-star reviews on their website because, let me tell you something, I do not like swapping out bedding to suit the weather. It's a huge pain. I don't want to change my sheets. I don't want winter sheets and summer sheets. I just want one set of sheets. This is why I love cozy earth bedding. It is the softest, most luxurious and responsibly sourced bedding in the world. It's made from sustainable bamboo, which allows it to breathe. The bedding is naturally temperature regulating, which is my favorite part of it. So you will sleep comfortably all year round. Doesn't matter if it's hot outside or cold outside, you will sleep great. I sure do. So whether it's their luxury sheets, their loungewear, their pajamas, or their new bath collection, you will love shopping at Cozy Earth. And now you can save 35% on Cozy Earth. You do have to hurry. This offer ends soon. Go to cozyearth.com/Liz35 and be sure to enter LIZ35 at checkout to save 35%. That's cozyearth.com/Liz35. So shareholder capitalism is what we have now. Klaus Schwab wants to fundamentally transform the economic system of our country, but countries all over the world, into what he calls stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism, it means that businesses would not make decisions based on their bottom line. They wouldn't make actual business decisions. They would make political decisions disguised as business decisions because their decisions would be based on the interests of not their shareholders, but their stakeholders. And who is a stakeholder? Well, Klaus Schwab's definition of a stakeholder is just about everybody. Specifically, he said, stakeholders are people interested in radical leftist political agenda items like abortion and environmentalism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. These people who are activists and lobbyists for those mostly neo-Marxist agenda items, those are the stakeholders, and those people Klaus Schwab wants businesses to take into account when they make decisions for their business. Not to think about their shareholders, not to think about their customers, not to think about their profit, but to think about serving that political agenda. Again, this brings us back to Chris Rufo's tweet. Chris is absolutely right to identify the need here in the United States for anti-ESG legislation. Absolutely right. We should be advocating for this all across the country in individual states. We should be pushing for this at the federal level. But we should ask the question of why do we need this? Why do we need this? The answer to this is because the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab have universalized ESG. ESG ESG is the mechanism by which stakeholder capitalism is enforced. The environmental, social, and governance metrics, as defined by Klaus Schwab, rate businesses based on their loyalty to these quote-unquote stakeholders. The World Economic Forum, with their universalized ESG metrics, have captured power players in business, in politics, and in finance. And of course, these government officials from all over the world, including, unfortunately, from the United States. The other things that Chris Rufo mentions in this tweet thread are all part of this same neo-Marxist agenda, or this neo-Marxist ideology, the breakdown of civil institutions, cultural institutions. These are just a precursor for the fall or the toppling of government institutions in Western nations and free nations. All of these agenda items are tied into one. They have in their direct object the abolition, the destruction of a free market capitalist society. So while the social institutions are crumbling through the influence of Klaus Schwab, our economic function is being conditioned, once the social institutions fall, to quickly transition directly to what? To a Chinese communist style, quote unquote, capitalism, which isn't exactly Marxism, it isn't exactly communism, because the state doesn't own the means of production and distribution, and there's not pure collectivism, but the Chinese Communist Party controls these so-called private entities. How? Through social credit scores that are exactly like ESG scores. Corporate ESG scores and individual ESG scores. Corporate social credit scores and individual social credit scores. So then we get to ESG exactly, right? ESG we've talked about a great deal. E is for environmentalism. You know, this is the climate change alarmism stuff, the Green New Deal. The S, the social, is essentially DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion poison, which is, I mean, it's religious discrimination, it's racism, it's intolerance, it's horrible. It takes our country backwards. The G, the governmental policies, are like abortion, reparations, redistribution of wealth, socialism, this kind of stuff. ESG is a radically leftist neo-Marxist ideology wrapped into what's presented to us as something good and moral, but it's not. ESG, though, is not just an invention of Klaus Schwab. It's not something that he latched onto that already existed. ESG is embedded into our businesses thanks to financial institutions like BlackRock and Bank of America, who attend Davos and the World Economic Forum. The CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, is there right now. And our government's agenda in social engineering matches this Schwabian agenda. And I'm not just talking about Build Back Better. I'm talking about a new secret plan from the administrative state of the Biden administration, a secret plan of Biden's to transform our entire neighborhoods, our cities, our lives, our suburbs. It's called the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. It's an interagency, they describe it, I'll read you their description. Quote, a landmark interagency framework of strategies and actions to remove all emissions from the transportation sector by 2050. This was put together by the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The goal of this U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization is zero emissions by 2050, but by 2030, they want 50% of all new vehicles to be zero emission and 30% of all new trucks to be so. This is like 7 years from now. That's not a long time at all. This is what the plan reads. It says, because we have to do this because no one should be exposed to air pollution in their community or on their ride to school or work, and eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from transportation is imperative to tackle the climate crisis. Pete Buttigieg, part of this, he's the Secretary of Transportation. This is how he describes it, because it goes far outside of just cars. It goes to the entire restructuring of our society. He said, transportation policy is inseparable from housing and energy policy, and transportation accounts for a major share of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So we must work together in an integrated way to confront the climate crisis. So what does this plan call to do? It doesn't just call for cars to be fully electric cars, to be zero emissions. It calls for the restructuring of American cities, the abolition of the suburbs. Even if they don't use those specific words, that's the same thing that they're describing in different words. It calls for people to be packed in dense urban centers. This is what they say, because every hour we don't spend sitting in traffic is an hour we can spend focused on the things and the people we love, all while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They call for more compact cities and towns with a mix of commercial, residential, and civic uses close to each other. They don't want you to own a car. They don't want you to drive. They want you to be packed so tightly in these dense urban centers that car ownership and use is completely unnecessary. They say a compact urban form can also help reduce distance traveled at various supply chain stages, thereby making light modes such as cargo bikes and smaller EVs more practical for freight delivery. Cargo bikes for freights? Really? Pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, motorists, and delivery drivers can also improve roadway safety for all users, encouraging more people to choose active transportation, which is defined as walking or riding your bike. This ideology that Klaus Schwab embraces at the World Economic Forum that we just heard described on the stage of Davos, this annual meeting, is already here in the United States. It has been exported. The Biden administration has embraced it. I would argue that Klaus Schwab is one of the most influential men on the planet. And the green energy, this pretense that this is all being done for the sake of our planet to combat climate change is absolute BS. There's a man by the name of John Lee Pettymore who tweeted a Twitter thread that I want to read parts of to you. He said, quote, "As a miner for 40 years, I have worked in various mines around the world: gold, platinum, copper, coal, lead, zinc, oil, and salt. I'm going to tell you something, and here it is. We will destroy the earth in the name of green energy. Follow along," he says, and I will explain. Mining Watch Canada is estimating that 3 billion tons of mined metals and minerals will be needed to power the energy transition. A massive increase, especially for 6 critical minerals: lithium, graphite, copper, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth minerals. Over the next 30 years, 7.5 billion of us, we will consume more minerals than the last 70,000 years, or the past 500 generations, which is more than all of the 108 billion humans who have ever walked the earth. Mining requires the extraction of solid ores, often after removing vast amounts of overlying rock. Then the ore must be processed, creating an enormous quantity of waste, about 100 billion tons a year, more than any other human-made waste stream. Purifying a single ton of rare earth requires using at least 200 cubic meters of water, which then becomes polluted with acids and heavy metals. On top of that, imagine the destruction and energy required to obtain these essential metals. 18,740 pounds of purified rock to produce 2.2 pounds of vanadium. 35,275 pounds of ore for 2.2 pounds of cerium. 110,230 pounds of rock for 2.2 pounds of gallium. 2,645,550 pounds of ore to get 2.2 pounds of lutetium. Also, staggering amounts of ore are needed for other minerals. By 2035, Pettymore writes, demand is expected to double for germanium, quadruple for tantalum, and quintuple for palladium. The scandium market could increase 9-fold and the cobalt market by a factor of 24. The potential demand for rare metals is exponential. We are already consuming over 2 billion tons of metals every year, the equivalent of more than 500 Eiffel Towers every single day. There's nothing refined about mining. It involves crushing rock and then using a concoction of chemical reagents such as sulfuric and nitric acid, a long and highly repetitive process using many different procedures to obtain a rare earth concentrate close to 100% purity. As rare metals have become ubiquitous in green and digital technologies, the exceedingly toxic sludge they produced has been contaminating water, soil, the atmosphere, and the flames of blast furnaces. Do you think solar panels are green? Think again. There's nothing green about solar panels. Did you know we clear-cut forests, not for panel placement, but for the wood needed to produce the panels? He says, I have seen the destruction of mountains, lakes, and pristine waterways, all in the name of green energy. A recent report by the Blacksmith Institute identifies the mining industry as the second most polluting industry in the world. Soon to be number one. Why? Green energy. Green technologies require the use of rare minerals whose mining is anything but clean. Heavy metal discharges, acid rain, and contaminated water sources, it borders on being an environmental disaster. Put simply, clean energy is a dirty affair. He goes on here, but you get the point. This is not about a higher moral. This is not about being good stewards of the earth. This is not about taking care of our planet. This is not about combating so-called climate change. And businesses who have neglected the market demands, neglected their shareholders, they can't contradict the government green energy policy. They can't, because the system has been rigged by ESG. Green energy is a fraud, just like the underlying climate alarmism is a fraud, but ESG forces it on us all, and it also simultaneously makes it impossible for popular opinion to reject it. Companies don't listen to their customers anymore because they care more about their ESG score than they do about their market value. And then, of course, the S in ESG is the neo-Marxism that has corrupted our institutions, that has led to the institutional capture that we are fighting against right now. So circle back to the very beginning. Since COVID, there were a lot of people that didn't react the way that I wanted them to react during the COVID lockdowns and the COVID tyranny. At the same time, so many people's eyes have been opened. So many people. Eyes opened to the peril of technocracy. People have lost faith, and rightly so, properly so, in these institutions that have been captured. And we know that in order to revive and restore the American spirit, we have to take back these institutions. We have to cut off the head of the snake of neo-Marxist ideology from where it's being disseminated around the world, in government, in private businesses, and in our society at large. And that is from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. If we neglect to fight back against it, then we are not acknowledging the reality of the political enemy that we face. And if we do not acknowledge the reality of this political enemy, we will not fight well against it, and we will lose. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show. If you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video.